let's have a look, just a recap of what were believed to be the prevailing causes of madness, insanity, lunacy, mental ill health, call it what you will, at the beginning of the 20th century, just to give us the kind of deeper context that we need. And in fact, I'm going to go beyond that. In this slide, what I'm trying to indicate is that a kind of psychiatry, emerging psychiatry with medicine, and whether their theories of disease causation and whether their therapies are similar and where they might grow apart. And you'll see in the topmost one there, I've got our old friend the humours, balance, imbalance, and I'm saying that with both madness and mainstream medicine, as far as it existed, they were on the same page. They had the same model of disease causation, and they were using the same methods of cure. This model thrown out the window, develop new models, still incredibly holistic in the way that they go about their business. The Paris Clinic sees the emergence of a model that painted a picture of proximate and exciting causes, the exciting causes being the environmental or social cultural trigger that brings on the illness, the proximate causes being the disease itself. And again, what we see is both madness and medicine operating in the same zone for both causation and treatment. Miasma theory, which we haven't talked about in any detail, but that's basically the bad air infecting people. That could be seen as a cause for madness, and of course the therapy is exactly the same. Evolution and degeneration, the kind of stuff that we looked at last week with Darwinism. Again, there's madness and medicine operating with the same models of disease causation, but this huge therapeutic gap has opened up between understanding the causes of the disease and the ability to treat it. A gap in terms of this kind of model that can only be solved by stopping people one way and another from breeding. And then as well, what we're going to deal with in a moment is the infectious diseases model. We'll see the history. For those of you that don't know it, we'll briefly skip over it. But this model that emerges in the latter part of the 19th century, a model we know incredibly well today, a model that posited the idea that most diseases, not all, most diseases were caused by some form of infectious agent. Now, what I'm suggesting here is that the general run-of-the-mill explanation of this is that this transforms the way that people in the wide sphere of medicine think about the body and mind, the body in sickness and health. But in terms of the realm of psychiatry, the infectious diseases model traditionally has not been seen as having a great deal of a role to play in terms of either causation or therapy. So what I'm suggesting is when this model comes about, transforms the way that many people are thinking about medicine, suddenly psychiatry is out on a limb because it can't join, this is a thought, the infectious diseases party. Not a nice thought, but it can't join the party. We'll see, however, that it very much did try and join the party.
In this edited section of the lecture, what I want to do is look at Henry Cotton's time at the Trentham Asylum in New Jersey. I've redacted the lecture in such a way that I've left out the major parts of the history of the Trentham Asylum, and on top of which I don't talk very much about the therapy that Cotton undertakes on the back of his theory. I will deal with those in subsequent lectures. But what follows should give you a clear idea of how theories of auto-intoxication overlapped with theories of madness.
Henry Aloysius Cotton was appointed superintendent. So Cotton is this new broom coming into the Trenton Asylum. And he was some new broom, it had to be said. He had been trained at the very best schools, including Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, where under Adolph Meyer, the psychiatry or the psychiatry part of medicine was incredibly well developed and the strongest of its kind in the USA. He then went on to serve at some of the best asylums. For example, he serves at Worcester, which I think is in Massachusetts. Worcester is one of those asylums, rather like the West Riding, that has set up its own laboratory and is trying to drive research into the biological origins of madness. He studied under Adolph Meyer, who was at this time becoming the most powerful patron in psychiatry in America. Cotton also then does all of those things that an ambitious medical student would do at this time, particularly an ambitious psychiatrist. He travels to Heidelberg, where Kraepelin has his institution. Skull says to Munich, but Heidelberg seems a lot more likely, where he worked and studied under Kraepelin, Nissl and Alzheimer, all, as we've seen, very important figures in biological psychiatry, particularly Alzheimer. And, well, Cotton, like many before him, has an ambition, and that ambition is to make psychiatry scientific, and he's going to use the Trenton Asylum to do this. So he institutes a program, the typical kind of program that an ambitious psychiatrist will implement in an asylum when he's put in charge of it. He abolishes the restraint that's been reintroduced. He establishes a new laboratory where the biological aspects of mental conditions can be studied. As far as he can, he appoints the best and brightest to positions within the institution. He uses Adolph Meyer as the contact to recruit these individuals. But more than that, he's got a theory to back up his research program. And his theory is that mental illness is bodily based, that brain disease equals mental disease. We've seen this time and time again before. But crucially, the brain disease was not caused by neurological damage. The brain disease is not caused by something structural within the brain, where you could say, track down a lesion to say, oh, there you've got the cause of the mental illness, the cause of the condition. No, for him, it was due to the metastasis of infective matter hidden in pockets of infection around the body, covertly, unidentifiable, but then poisoning the system, going up to the brain and poisoning the brain. So, in other words, the focal infection within the body itself was the cause of madness, which of course means that if you remove the pocket of infection, you then have a potential cure for madness. So here we have the infectious diseases model arriving in the asylum. Remove the poison, cut out the sites of focal infection. Well, if you were unlucky enough, well, when you dig deeper, it becomes apparent that actually all Cotton was doing was operating within an emergent paradigm that effectively collapses in on itself round about the time of his death. Because he wasn't the only person that was touting around these theories of auto-intoxication, intoxication. In other words, the poisoning of the system for whatever cause, a poisoning that eventually impacts on the mind. None other than Kraepelin himself, who we saw as the kind of origins of a statistically based, description-based prognosis of mental disease, who has been sold in many quarters as having no interest in biology and psychiatry, it turns out that Kraepelin himself held to a form of auto-intoxication theory, particularly in regards to dementia praecox, the condition that gets rebranded schizophrenia in 1911. So we know, in the main, he's come down to us as this psychopathologist who charts symptoms and prognosis. We know that he was responsible for drawing the map, if you like, of schizophrenia, a map that separated out different categories. You could have hebephrenic dementia praecox, catatonic dementia praecox, paranoid dementia praecox, and in many regards those categories feed into the redescription of schizophrenia in 1911. We know as well from our previous lectures that Kraepelin himself has a very strongly held belief in degeneration as a cause of mental illness, which on the face of it would make you therapeutically sceptic beyond preventing people from breeding. But it turns out, for the case of dementia praecox, that he didn't believe that it was the primary cause. Instead, he held to a theory of self-poisoning. A theory of self-poisoning. In other words, something in the system is creating a poison, not in the brain, but in the body. It's going up to the brain and causing dementia praecox, schizophrenia. Which then means, of course, that it's preventable and treatable if the mechanisms of self-poisoning could be discovered. And this leads us to the conclusion that we can be too black and white about the role of degeneration, genetic theory, in psychiatry and the wider sphere of medicine. Like many psychiatrists, they're trying to balance the two things together so that a combination of the predisposing cause of degeneration and the exciting cause of auto-intoxication or self-poisoning are what might come together to create a condition like dementia praecox. Now, there were two different schools of I got it intoxication, but it should be auto-intoxication, because obviously intoxication is having a few drinks or drugs, and this refers to something that is a slightly different process. The two views that were put forward were predominantly the one that Cotton and a number of others held to, of focal sepsis, the hidden pockets of infection, or the one that Kraepelin held to, that was based in the new, developing, work in progress that was endocrinology and the discovery of the hormone system. Kraepelin himself noted that there were many similarities between the symptoms of myxedema, previously called dropsy, and I've forgotten the other one. There were many, a form of hypothyroidism, so your thyroid gland's not producing enough thyroid or whatever it is, and you know, I'm not a medic, so I can't give you the exact pathways. And aside from the kind of swelling, hair thinning, and all of those things that you can see there, on occasion it would result in various forms of mania or dementia that had certain similarities to dementia praecox. So it was a fair call in a way, seeing the similarities and then thinking that something like hypothyroidism might be the cause of auto-intoxication. And the idea was, it was quite complicated. If you were suffering from this kind of imbalance, the poisoning would then happen through a chain of reaction in the body and then up to the brain, where it would cause you to experience the symptoms of DP. Now, with both cases, surgery was an option: teeth, tonsils, stomach, reproductive organs. With endocrinology, some psychiatrists and surgeons went as far as removing the thyroid gland, and others indulged in a new therapy that had emerged during the 1890s that was called organotherapy, that could be effective in cases of myxedema, where you basically shoot in some thyroid and it fixes the system. And that was the kind of therapy that Kraepelin himself was interested in. And again, within the endocrinology framework, we can see it working with the hereditarian view, the view of degeneration, even to the extent that in 1913, Jung put forward an idea that balanced degeneration with thyroid imbalance. And we can see as well that Cotton was not alone in what he was doing. There's a list of some of those that were involved in thyroid surgery or organotherapy. There are others, particularly in the UK, who were following the same kind of path as Cotton himself. Bayard Taylor Holmes in Chicago was very notable for the heroic surgery that he undertook to try and treat mental illness. Arbuthnot Lane in Britain wasn't quite so heroic, but he was engaged in very similar practices. And just to give you an idea, Arbuthnot Lane himself became a lord of the realm, so it didn't harm him, whatever it was that he was doing. Auto-intoxication theory does not last. By 1936, it's listed as a deceased disease, and this was due to the failure to find etiological mechanisms and to treat effectively. A number of people have been unsure about the theory from very early on, from before Cotton, because nobody was finding the evidence. Nobody was finding the pockets of infection that could point to this process occurring. So that was a major drawback in terms of establishing the theory itself. On top of that, we have a new set of psychogenic theories put forward by Freud, Jung and Mayer, which are increasing in popularity, and at the same time hereditarian causation is remaining a principal element of models of causation. The point, however, is that Cotton is engaged in a very similar process to the rest of his peers. That process is trying to draw out a map of mental illness that includes what might cause it, and once you've identified your cause, how that is going to cure the conditions that you are looking at. His speculation can't be painted as the kind of aberration that Shorter says that it is, because quite clearly there are a lot of other people that are making the same speculations. He is most definitely not a man alone. But that attempt to try and make medical science, science per se, physiology, pathology, work with therapy, is going to be at the heart of many other speculations that are equally as outrageous and yet manage to persist in terms of their curative outcomes and the methods deployed for far longer than Cotton's own particular methods.